It started with a classified ad in the back of the local paper. Nothing special. Just a few lines under rooms for rent. Room available in quiet boarding house. Furnished. Utilities included. No pets. Call for details. The price was low enough to make me reread it twice. Cheaper than any of the other listings I'd been circling with my pen for the last hour. I just moved to town for work at a printing press and was living out of a motel that smelled like wet carpet. A boarding house wasn't my first choice, but money was tight, and the idea of a private room sounded like heaven compared to paper-thin walls and the sound of a stranger coughing all night. I called the number, and a woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was thin, almost polite to a fault. She said her name was Mrs. Calloway, and yes, the room was still available. If I could come by that afternoon, she could show me around. I scribbled down the address and told her I'd be there by 3. The house was an old 3-story Victorian with peeling green paint and a porch that sloped toward the street. The kind of place that looked like it had history. It sat wedged between 2 other weathered homes, their siding warped from years of rain. The lawn was uneven, dotted with weeds, and the porch steps groaned under my weight. When I knocked, the door opened almost immediately, like she'd been standing right behind it. Mrs. Calloway was in her 60s, wearing a faded blue dress with a collar buttoned all the way up. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, and she had that way of smiling that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked me over quickly like she was measuring something, then stepped aside and motioned me in. The inside smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something older beneath it, like dust trapped in fabric. The hallway was narrow, the wallpaper a faded floral pattern that had probably been there for decades. She led me up a short flight of stairs to the second floor, the wood creaking under each step. The room she showed me was small but clean. A twin bed with a plain white comforter, a dresser, a desk with a lamp, and a single window that looked out over the street. The rent was exactly what she'd said on the phone, and utilities were included. I told her I'd take it. As she handed me the key, she hesitated. "There's another tenant upstairs," she said, nodding toward the ceiling. "Attic room. Keeps to himself. Doesn't bother anyone." Her voice dipped, as though this part wasn't important enough to linger on. Still, I noticed she didn't quite look me in the eye when she said it. I moved in that evening. My belongings fit into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. It felt strange at first, settling into someone else's furniture, but it beat the motel by a mile. That first night I unpacked, made myself a sandwich, and lay in bed listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. Around midnight I heard footsteps above me. They were slow, deliberate. The attic must have been directly over my room. I pictured the other tenant Mrs. Calloway had mentioned, pacing or shifting boxes around. The steps went from one end of the ceiling to the other, then stopped. After a few minutes they started again, back and forth. I told myself it was just someone restless, maybe working late. Eventually I fell asleep to the sound. The next morning over coffee, I asked Mrs. Calloway about him. "The man upstairs," I said casually. "Does he work nights?" She looked up from the paper she was reading, her lips tightening. "He has his own routine," she said, and left it at that. I figured she didn't like her tenants gossiping about each other, so I let it drop. The days passed quietly. I worked, came home, ate dinner alone in my room, and read until I was too tired to keep my eyes open. But every night, almost without fail, I'd hear those footsteps above me. Always after 11. Always the same pace, the same back and forth movement. It became part of my routine too, the sound marking the late hours before I drifted off. One rainy Thursday night, the steps stopped suddenly in the middle of their pattern. I was lying in bed half asleep, when the boards above my head went still. For a moment, I thought maybe the man had gone to bed early. But then I heard something else, a faint dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, then silence. No more pacing. No more movement. I lay there in the dark, my skin prickling, listening to the rain tap against the window until I finally slept. A week later, I came home earlier than usual and found Mrs. Calloway in the hallway, standing on a chair with a feather duster, reaching toward a high shelf. She looked startled to see me. "Oh, you're home," she said quickly, climbing down. I don't know why I asked, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. "Does the guy upstairs ever come down?" She froze for just a fraction of a second before replying. "Not much," she said. "He likes his privacy." That night, the pacing was louder than usual. The boards groaned as though someone much heavier was moving around up there. I tried to read, but every creak pulled my attention upward. Around midnight, I thought I heard something else. A soft thud like an object hitting the floor. Then a pause. Then 2 more thuds. I sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling. My pulse was in my throat. Eventually it stopped, and the room went still again. The next morning I noticed something odd in the hallway. A faint brown stain had appeared on the ceiling near the attic door, like water damage. Except it hadn't rained since that Thursday. I thought about asking Mrs. Calloway, but something told me not to. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I was coming up the stairs when I saw the attic door at the end of the hall. It was just a plain wooden door with an old brass knob, nothing special. But as I passed, I swear I felt a draft coming from under it. A faint, cold breath of air that made the hair on my arms stand up. That night, the footsteps didn't start until well past midnight. I was awake, lying in the dark when I heard them. Low, heavy, pacing the same path over and over. But this time between the steps I heard something else, a low, rhythmic sound like breathing. It was faint, but it was there. I held my breath, listening until my chest ached. Then the steps stopped, and the breathing seemed to fade away. It was around then that I started having strange dreams. In them I was standing in the hallway outside my room, staring up at the attic door. I'd hear footsteps behind it, and I'd reach for the knob, but when I turned it, the door would swing open to complete darkness. A smell would roll out, damp and sweet like rotting flowers. Something would be there in the dark with me, just out of sight. And then I'd wake up. One Saturday afternoon, I heard Mrs. Calloway talking to someone downstairs. A man's voice, low and steady. I thought maybe it was the upstairs tenant, finally emerging. I went down to grab a drink from the kitchen, but by the time I got there, the voice was gone. Mrs. Calloway was alone, standing at the sink. I asked if someone had been visiting. She didn't look at me when she said, "Just a friend. You missed him." 2 nights later, everything changed. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of footsteps again, but they weren't overhead this time. They were in the hallway. Slow, dragging steps, coming from the attic door toward my room. I froze, my heart hammering. The steps stopped right outside my door. I could hear breathing, heavy, uneven. My hand moved toward the lamp, but I didn't turn it on. I just lay there in the dark, every muscle locked, listening. After what felt like a full minute, the breathing faded, and the steps moved back down the hall, up the attic stairs. The boards above me creaked as they resumed their pacing. The next morning, I confronted Mrs. Calloway. I told her someone had been outside my room in the middle of the night. She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. "You should probably know," she said quietly. "The man in the attic. He passed away a few months before you moved in." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. "He had a stroke," she continued. "Right up there in his room. I found him the next morning. He didn't have any family, so the coroner took him. I never rented it out again. But sometimes I still hear him." She looked down at her hands. "So do the other tenants. That's why the rent is low." I wanted to tell her she was crazy, that there was a real person up there. But deep down, I knew she was telling the truth. My stomach turned cold. That night, I locked my door and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The footsteps came like they always did, steady and patient. And for the first time I noticed something else. Every few minutes, there was a soft scrape against the floorboards, like fingers dragging across the wood. I pulled the blanket over my head and tried not to breathe. It's been 3 months now. I still live here, still pay the cheap rent. I've gotten used to the pacing, the breathing, the dragging sounds. Some nights I even find them almost comforting, like someone is making sure I'm still here. I don't go near the attic door anymore, and I don't ask questions, because I'm afraid one night, the footsteps will stop overhead and start again in the hallway, and this time they won't turn back.